Hey everyone, in this video I wanted to show you guys how to set up SSH so that you can remotely connect to your Linux machines. Now if you aren't familiar with what SSH is a network protocol that provides a secure transport between two devices. So what it really does is it gives network administrators, it gives systems administrators a secure way to access remote devices over an unsecured network. And SSH ultimately replaced a few other protocols that weren't quite as secure, like Telnet. Those protocols, what they did was when you remotely connected to another device using something like Telnet, what would happen is when you started sending commands, it would send that in clear text over the network. So when you started entering in passwords, well, if there's someone in the middle of the network sniffing those packets, they could see all your passwords. So SSH was created to accomplish the same thing as something like Telnet, but also provide, authentication and encryption to ensure that no one can, read the commands that you're sending. No one can basically decrypt anything that you're doing. So everything is encrypted as it traverses the network, and basically you and the device that you're connecting with are the only ones that can actually see the actual traffic. So, as I stated before, SSH provides authentication and encryption. It also performs checks on data being transferred between a session to ensure integrity. And we can also use it to create secure tunnels for other protocols. So SSH employs the common server-client relationship. The device that we want to connect to is considered the server in this relationship, and the device that we're connecting from is considered the client. Now, both of the server and the client both need to have their respective SSH programs installed. The client will need to have the SSH command available so that he can actually connect to the remote device, and the server will need to be running the SSHD daemon to listen for connections from various clients. Now, there's a few different authentication methods that are available. There's actually more than the ones that I've listed on this slide, but I just wanted to go over a couple of the main ones. So there's password-based authentication. So with password-based authentication, when you try to log into another device, it'll prompt you for a password, and then you go ahead and enter in your password, and then that's how it provides authentication that you are who you say you are. Then we also have key-based authentication, and that will actually bypass your password prompt altogether, so that when you actually SSH to the device, it'll know who you are based off of keys that you've installed on that machine and on your own, and it'll automatically authenticate you. And this is generally the preferred method of doing things, so I highly recommend that you get familiar with setting up SSH keys, because it's a little more secure. And it's a lot more convenient because you don't have to keep entering in your password. And another one I just threw in there is host-based authentication. So you can, explicitly configure your SSH server to allow specific hosts to connect to you, to it. I'm not going to go over how to do that for now. Just focus on using password-based authentication and SSH keys-based authentication. Now so for this video, we're going to actually implement OpenSSH, which is a open source implementation of the SSH protocol. And there's three main packages that we can install, and that's OpenSSH. So that provides, the SSH keygen commands. Then we have OpenSSH clients, and as you suspect, the OpenSSH clients package is going to provide all the commands and files necessary to perform as a SSH client. And then we have the OpenSSH server, and that contains the SSHD daemon, so that's going to allow us to receive connections from remote clients and allow them to connect to you. Now, to install OpenSSH, we do a basic sudo apt install, and then you can do OpenSSH server or OpenSSH client based on your role. I would go ahead and recommend just doing both so that you can perform either role on any machine. Now, to actually SSH to another device, you have to use the SSH command. And the format of that command is you do SSH, then the username that's configured on the remote server that you want to log in as, then the @ symbol, and then the IP address or host name of the SSH server that you want to connect to. Now that's for Linux and Mac machines. If you're using Windows, you're going to have to install a third-party SSH client like PuTTY or SecureCRT. Now, for key-based authentication, the first thing that we have to do is actually generate these keys. So on the client, you would run the command ssh-keygen. And once again, that only works for Linux and Macs. For Windows, you'll need to use another application. If you already installed PuTTY, that usually comes with an application called PuTTYgen, which will allow you to generate keys for your Windows machine. Now, once you generate your keys, you'll actually generate two keys. You have your private key and your public key. And on Linux machines, the private key is going to be stored in the .ssh/id_RSA, and the public key will be in that same directory, but it'll be called id_rsa.pub. So once you've configured or generated those keys, you want the client to copy his public key and paste it into the server's authorized keys file. So that's ultimately how the server is going to authenticate users using the key method, is that it'll look in the authorized keys file for that public key, and that's how it knows that you are a valid user and that you can log in. Now, to actually copy the key to the server, there's two different ways we can actually do it. We can use the ssh-copy-id command, or you can do that long command beneath it. I would recommend just doing the first one, but if you have a Mac, to actually use the first command, you'd have to install that command, so it may be easier to just run the command but beneath it. All right, so let's log into our machines and let's take a look at that real quick. Okay, so we have this machine right here, the one that we've been working on in all my other videos. This is going to be the machine that we want to connect to. Okay, so we want to set this up as the SSH server, that's so that any other device, including my host machine, which is this Windows 10 machine, can actually connect to it, and then that way I won't have to continually use the console to connect to it, and I can access the terminal from any other machine. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we have SSH installed on this machine. Now, to do that, let's just see if it's already installed. Certain distributions might already have it installed. So just do sudo apt-list -- installed, and I'm just going to grep for SSH. And if we look through this, we can see that OpenSSH client is actually already installed. That's great, but we actually need OpenSSH server because we want this to perform as a server. But just to show you guys what OpenSSH client actually offers us, we can actually run the SSH command already, as well as the ssh-keygen command. And then so now we can technically connect to other devices because we have the client package already installed. And also with the client package, you get a few other commands like scp, which allows you to copy files over, and a few other commands. But let's go ahead and update our repository real quick. And then once that's finished, we'll go ahead and install the OpenSSH server package. Okay, so we get that, and then once that's done installing, we should be good to go. All right, we've installed OpenSSH server. Let's see if the actual service is running. So we do systemctl status sshd. So you can see here it's running. If yours doesn't say running and it's inactive, just type in systemctl start sshd and that'll start the process. So now that we have OpenSSH configured, let's go ahead and connect to my other Ubuntu machine. So this is a completely different machine, and I'm going to use him to connect to this guy right here. So let me make this a little smaller. So just to make sure you guys are following, Office machine, that's this PC right here. So that's going to represent one of the SSH clients, and they're going to try to connect to the one at Ubuntu. All right. So we've configured the machine with the hostname of Ubuntu to run OpenSSH. So now any of the users that are configured on this machine, we can log in as them as long as we have their password from this machine. And all we have to do is SSH, then the username. So right now there's actually, I believe there's 2 users. Yeah. Oh, no, there's only 1 user. It's just Sanjeev. So we're going to log in as Sanjeev. So we do SSH. Then the username we want to log in as. If we have more than 1 user, we can feel free to log into, whichever account we have credentials for. So we put in the username. Then we do the @ symbol, and then we get the IP address or the host name. So I don't have DNS set up, so I'm going to have to use the IP address. So just do IP add, and we're going to use this IP address right here, 192.168.0.6. It's going to ask you this message, just hit yes. Then it's going to prompt you for your password. Type in your password for that user. And there you go. We're logged into this machine. So if I go into, let's say, my home directory, which we're already at, and I'll just do mkdir, let's say new SSH directory. Now if we go back to this machine and check if that directory got made, we can see that it did. So we are in fact connected to this machine and operating on it like as if we were consoled into it. And so anything we can do in the console here, we can do it on this SSH session as well. And so if you want to exit out of your SSH session, just do an exit, and that'll take you out. So now we're connected back to our main machine. So I showed you guys how to connect to a Linux machine from another Linux machine using the SSH command. Now, what if we want to connect from a Windows machine? To do that, we actually have to download a separate application. And there's a few different applications that we can use. I'm going to show you guys how to use PuTTY, mainly because it's a free application and it's probably one of the more commonly used ones. So just open up a web browser and just search for PuTTY, and it should usually be the first link that you can find. So just select that, and let's see, latest version, download it here. Then we want the Windows installer. I have a 64-bit machine, so I'm going to select this guy right here. And all we have to do is just go through this menu, but I just remembered that I actually already had this installed, so I'm just going to cancel out of this, and then just follow the menu, just keep hitting next, and it'll just install it. It's pretty straightforward. It's like any other application. But anyways, after we finished installing it, just search for your application. Just search for PuTTY. There will actually be 2 different ones, PuTTY and PuTTYgen. Make sure you select PuTTY, and that's going to open this up. So what this is going to do is right here, you provide the IP address of the machine you're connecting to. So if you remember, that's 192.168.0.6, right? And then this is the port number. So SSH by default uses port 22. But if you've configured your machine to listen on a different port, which you can do, go ahead and change that value here. And then for connection type, make sure SSH is selected. Then we also have to give the username, just like we did with Linux. So we do Sanjeev @ and then we've given the IP address. We hit open. It's going to give you this message. Don't worry about that. Just hit yes. And then here it's going to prompt you for your password. After you see that, now we have a connection and we can do anything we want. We can, install applications, we can modify files. We have a full connection to the machine. We have all the same privileges that the user Sanjeev has because that's who we're logged in as. So that kind of concludes the password authentication portion of the video. I want to show you guys how to set up SSH keys now. And as I stated before when we were reviewing the slide deck, SSH keys provide an extra security mechanism because certain people will try to brute force your passwords, but with SSH keys, there's no passwords anymore. You won't get prompted for a password, and it uses the keys to actually authenticate users. So let's go back to our Linux machine. So this, remember right here, the Ubuntu machine is the server that we're going to try to connect to. And then this is the one that says Office machine is the client that we're going to connect from. So on the client, you want to generate the keys. And to generate keys on a Linux machine or a Mac machine, you type in the command SSH-keygen. Then it's going to ask you to enter the file in which you want to save your keys. Always just leave it default. I mean, there's really no reason to change that, so just hit enter here. Passphrase. You can provide a passphrase for extra security, but I'm going to leave that off for now. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to leave that blank as well. All right, so this at this point, we've now created our keys. Let's go ahead and inspect them real quick. So in your home directory, change or move to the .ssh directory and then do an ls-la. And here are your two SSH key files. So we have id_rsa, and that's our private key. And then we have id_rsa.pub, and that's our public key. So you don't want to mess with your private key, you just leave that there. But your public key, this is going to be what we use to copy over to the other machine. And then that way that machine will know to authenticate us properly. So we're going to take this file, essentially, and copy it over to this machine. And if we just take a look at that file just to see the contents of it, this is what a key looks like. So we could manually copy this and just paste it into the other machine's authorized keys file. But we're going to use the command that I mentioned in my slide deck. So we have the command SSH-copy ID, then we do username. So we're going to paste it under Sanjeev. And remember, this is the username that we want to log in as. If you have a different username on that same machine, then you would use that one, of course. So then we do 192.168.0.6, and remember that's the IP address of that machine. We hit enter. We got to put the password in for that user. There you go. And now the key is added. Let's see if we can find that key real quick. So if we go to the .ssh folder from our home directory and then do an ls-la, see that there's an authorized keys file. And if we cat that real quick, this should match our public key, id_rsa.pub, which is this guy right here. And if you inspect it, you'll find that it's exactly the same. So this command, all it did was it created the authentication keys, the authorized keys file. It set the proper permissions, which is just read write for the user. And it also copied the contents of our public key, and it just pasted it into this authorized keys file. And you could manually do that as well. So you can manually go in and copy it. And if you remember my slide deck, I provided another command. It was, let me paste it in for you guys real quick. It would have been this right here. This is doing the same exact thing. It's creating a directory inside .ssh, and it's creating the authorized keys file, and then it's going to copy the contents of our public key into that file. So now if we do an SSH Sanjeev at 192.168.0.6, notice how it didn't prompt us for a password. It just logged us in immediately. And that's because we've authenticated with our keys now. So that's how we set up authentication keys with SSH. If you want to do this with Windows, it's slightly different. We already installed the PuTTY application, and with PuTTY, it also installs this PuTTyGen application. So this is how we generate our keys using a Windows machine. So here we just click on Generate Keys, and it's going to ask us to move our mouse around in this area to actually generate the key. And then right here is our public key. So we're just going to copy the contents of this key. You also want to save your private key as well. We can just call this my private key. Save that. And then you just take this and we go back into our machine and we would just open up the authorized file and just paste it in here. And that's it. So that's all you have to do. And then now if you open up a new SSH session, just by using PuTTY, it should, whoops, you gotta search for PuTTY. And then now you put in your username and the IP address of the host you want to connect to. It should authenticate based off of your keys, and you shouldn't have to enter in a password. Alright guys, that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Hopefully you guys are good to go when it comes to setting up SSH now. It's not that difficult. There are obviously a lot of config changes that you can make to SSH. You can, explicitly permit certain hosts. You can allow certain subnets to only connect. You can modify the port that the server listens on. But for the basics, I think you guys are good for now.